Everybody, and welcome. My name is Terry Shane, and I'm joined today by Dan Simerman, who is the head of financial relations at the Iota Foundation. Um, Dan and I have met a few times in North America and also at SumSum last year in Germany. He's a great guy, lots to talk about, lots to say. And Dan actually gave me a great book recommendation on the way back to the airport last year, which was Shoshana Zuboff's
Oh, yeah.
Surveillance Capitalism, which I
Incredible.
which I read from cover to cover, and obviously lots of implications of that book as it relates to cryptocurrencies, distributed ledgers, and trust. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dan, obviously he's not only head of financial relations at IOTA, but he's also a member of OMG and INABTA. He's got a background in marketing and finance, and I believe he worked for Condé Nast for a while. That must have been a fun place to spend some time.
Yeah, I've had an interesting background of roles. Working in media was interesting. Kind of learned a lot about uh, how the what is it, the sausage gets made.
Yeah,
And yeah, and even before that, working in finance, I was building out regulatory software for Wells Fargo, their model risk management group. So never thought that I'd actually use that to any degree, but kind of surprising how that all worked out.
fantastic. Well, you
Yeah.
never know what your past experience can bring to your future experience. And I find I'm constantly surprised at all those things that I always said, this will never be of any value. And then suddenly, you know, 15 years later, it's like, oh, wow, that experience really, really helps here. So
Yep.
maybe I could start, with, how you feel that the things that Shoshana Zuboff discusses in her book relate to IOTA and trust and owning our own data, and how you think IOTA is going to make a meaningful difference in the world, specifically in North America, where we see collapse in trust in institutions that we once thought we would always be able to rely on. So um, perhaps we can start there and then we'll go into more stuff. And I just want to be clear to everybody, Dan is obviously here as a senior member of the IOTA Foundation, but I plan to also ask some questions of him of a personal nature, where we get personal opinions that really aren't necessarily the opinions of the foundation. But I guess today is an anything goes kinds of questions. So, coming to us live from New York, here's Dan.
Yeah. So great question, by the way, and it might produce a long-winded answer. So I apologize. But for those of you that aren't familiar with the Age of Surveillance Capitalism and Zuzana Zuboff's work, the primary takeaway is that you often hear that if you're not paying, you're the product, right? So um, with Facebook, it's free. That's because you're a product that's being sold to advertisers. Same with any other social media platform. And Sujan actually takes a step back and says, we're not actually the product. It's actually much worse than that. We're actually the raw material that's
Mm-hmm.
getting used to generate a product. So we're this kind of infinite resource. And so every time a new interface is made available, right, it's really just a data capturing mechanism. So there's an incentive for them to create more services that might be free or considered free because they get more information about us. I'll give you a really interesting example. I won't say which because I don't, who knows, I could work for them one day. Probably won't happen. But there was one of the big media companies. I got an email about a month ago saying, hey, we'd love to give you a new speaker for free. We'd just love to send you one of our new, it's like an Alexa type thing, right? Not Alexa, but an Alexa type product. We'll give it to you for free, and it's our gift to you. And any other person would go, oh, that's great, cool. This company's giving me a gift because I live in New York. But if you read Zuzana Zuboff's book, you get that what they're getting now is that now they have a listening device in my home
Yep.
and they can hear everything for free. So why is that?
And they're not just listening, but they're actually tracking everything you ask for, when you ask for it, how you ask for it. And she describes that as behavioral surplus.
Exactly. And what becomes problematic about that is that it's all in the guise of personalization, right? Give us as much data about you as possible so that I can make this interface blue, or I can give you this feature. But in reality, they're giving us the tip of the iceberg. And in reality, they know more about us than we could ever imagine, right? Like, they could crunch numbers and know when we might have an illness, or that they could predict through predictive analytics that we might have cancer before we even know it. And there's some examples in her book where she does that. So getting back to kind of the context of Iota and where Iota fits in is that it's one thing when this happens within our social media, right, or apps that we use.
Right.
And it's problematic, it's frustrating, it's upsetting when our data gets breached. It's upsetting that they use this information in ways that we might not find comfortable. It's quite another when this starts becoming embedded in our physical systems, right? Start thinking about IoT networks, start thinking about smart cities, start thinking about the incentives there. What's the incentive for a for-profit company that's creating a smart city ecosystem to incentivize you to move around the city in ways that are more valuable for the company rather than for ways that are maybe better for your health or well-being? So when you start having these misaligned incentives, you're going to really start to see them play out. So having a nonpartisan, neutral data protocol that just allows for data to be sent and received and allow for a sense of ownership or a potential for the data to be owned by the participant, I think that creates a very different environment for people to live in the future.
Cool. Any areas that are upcoming? Obviously, Chrysalis is imminent. We're really all looking forward to that. Anything that the introduction of the Chrysalis protocol or the upgrade is likely to mean from a financial or operational perspective for those of us here in North America? I'm really interested to hear how that might change things.
Yeah, so for those that have been following, Chrysalis, I can't even say it, 1.5 I like to call it. 1.5 kind of came out of this very clear need from our industrial partners, from people that were using the protocol going, we need these updates, right, to make it more usable, more user-friendly. And we eventually started writing out the documentation and implementing the features on Hornet. Single address reuse is actually a very big feature. Another one is EDDSA, so it's a new signature scheme. Mm-hmm. And I can give you a great example. So one of the biggest roadblocks right now to getting adopted is with custody solutions. So custody, if anyone's familiar with it, Fireblocks is a great example, Curve, BitGo. These are all institutional products where you can hold Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, these other large coins that are kind of, I'd say that we're on par with. You can hold them in a way that might be compliant with institutional requirements, but also there might be applications that connect to these custody solutions that are required to have a custody solution in order to be implemented. So, we might talk with a corporate partner or with a, exchange A or, industrial partner B, and they might go, are you on BitGo? Oh, you're not on BitGo? Okay, once you're on BitGo, then we can implement you. So it's been quite a big barrier for us for the last year. And with this update, with this EDDSA update, we now can be implemented on these custody solutions. We haven't been able to because all custody solutions require EDDSA for the most part. So just as an example, with this update, a lot of the partners that we've been talking to that are waiting for custody to integrate us will now I guess be in a better position to integrate us.
Yeah. Reading between the lines here, how long do you think from the release of Chrysalis are we likely to see implementations like BitGo? How much of a lag do you think? Is this a matter of days, weeks, months before that release then enables that kind of custody solution?
Yeah, so the custody solutions that we're looking at, I can't speak to which ones, but we're already in contact with them, we're already in communication, and it looks like what we'd probably be able to do is even have the work happen in tandem. So that hopefully what would happen is that is that, once we're running up on the test net or kind of a dev net environment, they could hopefully start building earlier so that there'd be a smaller lead time between when we release Cryptalysis and when they could start building and we could release it. So hopefully it wouldn't be that they'd start building the day that we release. Hopefully there'd be some coordination.
Right. So by Labor Day, we might see that kind of thing implemented, you think?
Uh, Too early to say. We might see that they're already working on it. Let's say.
Okay. All right.
Which is very exciting. But again, it all is dependent on how the signature scheme work comes out and kind of all the testing that goes into building out. But I think the most exciting part right now is really just the confirmation. The next update, which is white flag and confirmation times going down to 10 seconds. Yes. I think that's going to see such a huge improvement of the network that people are going to come back and see how fast we are, how we're not, how the network isn't failing under heavy load, and how we can hit kind of higher TPS in a more sustained way.
Awesome. Awesome. And how do you think after this that Iota will be positioned versus its competitors here in North America in terms of a platform on which people can actually build real solutions? I mean, I'm very excited to see the stuff about TM Forum and some of the other announcements that are coming out. But how do you feel today that we're positioned against some of the competition?
Yeah, so it depends. It depends how you define how we're positioned and who the competition is. I think that there's some offensive and there's some defensive positioning. I think that clearly the name of the game right now is DeFi, right? Decentralized finance. Mm-hmm. I was just on a call with David and Dominic, and we were talking about some kind of interesting things that that are already going to be available as part of 1.5 or with the new DApp framework that could be really interesting to explore. But I would say that many of our competitors are going into DeFi because that's all they can do, right? Like if you can't do it, if your protocol can't do anything, why not go into DeFi?
Right.
And the reason, and I've been, saying this as much as I can to anyone who will listen, it really is because of this parallel architecture that we have, right? Like we have the ability to send data and value, and I think we often, as a community, as IEN, as a organization, really downplay how important that is, right? We'll go to a corporate partner. There might be some that want to use the token. There might be others that go, we really like everything you're presenting, but we don't, think that for this particular use case, you need to use a token. So we prefer to just use that protocol for the data. We're the only protocol that can do that, right? And the reason that they might not feel comfortable is there might be legal issues, right? Holding a token. There might be regulatory reasons, right? They might be waiting for more clarity. There might be accounting-based reasons. Their organization just doesn't feel comfortable holding digital assets. Concerns, right? Imagine having an enterprise application where you have to, every time someone clicks a link on the app, you have to debit Ethereum as gas tax from it. That's just, it doesn't work in the real life.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So in that sense, every competitor that I see of ours is just a faster horse, right? Like talking about Polkadot, talking about Cosmos, talking about Ethereum, talking about some of the lower level ones that are trying to compete with us, like the Algorands and the Hashgraphs. They're faster horses, right? I think that the reasons people aren't liking Ethereum aren't going to be the reasons that they decide to move over to one of those platforms, is my personal take. So I think that we're in a really good position to capture a lot of that value and a lot of that ecosystem once they realize that it's not a problem of how fast the network is or how easy it is to build on, but the fact that nobody wants to use an application that requires a token for even data-based applications.
Cool. Yeah. And just to clarify, your faster horse metaphor is a horse that's faster than other horses, but we consider Iota to be the automobile versus the horse rather than just a faster horse.
Exactly. I believe it was Henry Ford that said if I'd asked people what they want, they would have said a faster horse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing is integration with other coins, because again, the TM Forum event, which I'm signed up for, really interested in that, because that's a real world use case in communications, telecommunications, which is massive numbers of transactions, a massive amount of clearinghouse, sort of problems where you have multiple suppliers, because when you route a phone call, an international phone call. You have all these different carriers who all have to charge funds back and forth for who's actually initiating and terminating the call, and there's a ledger that has to be settled there, and
Yep.
nobody trusts anybody. And I was really intrigued to see that they're going to be talking about the integration not only of Iota for the data level, but integrations with R3 Corda. Can you speak to anything around that? Because I thought that was really interesting, the collaboration and the cooperation of two different DLTs to come up with a solution there.
Yeah, so I can't speak too much to the TM Forum work only because I'm not so close to it.
Yeah.
But to that idea of integrating with other chains, this is kind of a controversial topic. I don't think everyone agrees with me on this, but there's one partner that's actually a blockchain that we're talking to right now. This is something we don't usually do, but we see a lot of potential synergy with them. Um, Getting back to that idea of our biggest value proposition being a data protocol that can be ubiquitous, right? That's feeless, that can be used. There are so many other blockchains that have their own business development groups that are reaching out to probably some of the similar groups that we are, and I'm sure that they are hitting the snag that is, we like your technology, but we can't build on you because of a token. So my kind of an early thought is, well, why not make Iota the data, just as like Chainlink is the Oracle solution? Why not make Iota the feeless protocol solution? Like, why not be able to integrate, let's say you're Tron, let's say you're EOS, let's say you're whatever. Why not, if you have a partner that wants to build on you that's feeless, why not be able to have like a side chain that basically runs on Iota? Now, I don't even know if technically that's possible. I've talked to the research, and my understanding is that it is. It probably depends, obviously, from chain to chain. But I think even just kind of talking pie in the sky, I think that's a really interesting way to capture a lot of market share, right? We become like a de facto. We've already kind of captured like the IoT DLT
Yep.
market, I'd say. And I think this is just another extension of that. So I'd like to see more protocols look at the feeless capabilities that we have and maybe leverage us for that and see us more as a I hate to use the word like interoperability in that context, but like an integration uh, point.
Okay. I'm going to sort of pull in some questions as we go from the audience because there are a number of questions that are pending. So I see a question from Michael here. Dan, question: since you joined and without breaking any NDAs, although you can share whatever you want with us here, what volume of adoption is now being sourced out of the US as opposed to Europe, which is obviously the place that IOTA started and where we see a lot of the stuff. How much interest would you say is now happening in North America rather than sort of EMEA and APAC?
Yeah. So here's without without sounding too cryptic. The kind of adoption that I've been looking at is a little different than maybe what our traditional team has been doing, right? Because I kind of fall in like a different category of what I've been focusing on. But I would point to the recent Crypto Ratings Council rating. I think everyone saw that. For those of you that didn't, I highly recommend going to Crypto Ratings Council, look at the rating that was published, and then look at some of the backers there. All I can really say at this point is that, to what I said earlier, there is a big backlog, and they're all waiting for EDDSA. So we've had quite a lot of adoption and quite a lot of excitement in using the protocol and adopting the protocol more
Okay.
on kind of the kind of financial infrastructure side.
Okay.
And yeah.
So it sounds like a great opportunity to double down, but then that begs the other question. I know this is not financial investment advice, but being here in North America, I'm in Canada. Getting money in and out of IOTA is not for the faint of heart. You know, we have very limited options in terms of buying IOTA. Um, for myself, I have to start with Kraken, then I have to send the funds from Kraken to Bitfinex, and then withdraw the IOTA from Bitfinex. And if you ever wanted to go in the reverse direction, it's every bit as complicated, if not more so. I have successfully gone in both directions. But as I said, it's not for the faint of heart. So with Chrysalis, um, are we going to see greater access of IOTA at sort of, your first point of call in terms of an exchange where you don't have to, send US, I'm in Canada, so I have to transfer money from Canadian funds to US dollars, transfer the US dollars to an exchange, buy Ethereum, transfer the Ethereum to buy IOTA, and then reverse that whole process. It would be wonderful if that could be easier. Are we likely to see that, and over what sort of time frame after Chrysalis?
Quick answer is yes, absolutely. And um, still working on it even without Chrysalis. So like Simplex, I don't know if everyone saw, but we recently just integrated with Simplex, which allows you to buy IOTA directly from a credit card. So
Okay.
how Simplex works is that Simplex is integrated with all of the major platforms. So Binance and OKEX, and I don't have the full list in front of me, but you'll probably see in the coming weeks that that'll be turned on from one platform to the next. So to acquire IOTA will be way, way, way easier just with the Simplex integration. In terms of integrating back, that's obviously different, but I think we're going to see more platforms in North America with the changes. And really, it's just a function of when Chrysalis is made available. But I mean, anything could happen in this market, right? Anything could happen in the digital asset space, but I would say that we're in a really, really good position. I'll probably be able to answer that better after the third quarter, probably halfway through, so like in a month and a half.
Cool, cool. Another question from Ben is thoughts on colored coins. And, I'd like to add to that in terms of thoughts on colored coins as they relate to using IOTA to create stablecoin equivalents to regular fiat.
Yeah, so I have a working group that internally right now, and we're working on building out some more of the architecture around tokenized assets in general. I'm a fan of colored coins. I saw that there was some concern in the community about what it take away from the IOTA token.
Hmm.
I don't think so. I think that's kind of a um, false equivalency. Is that the right word? Like, I think the logic goes something like this. Um, there's someone that wants to have an asset that represents their token. Um, and if the functionality is not available, they're just going to use the IOTA token instead. The reality is that they'll probably move to another platform, right? So what's a better option? Is it to make it available and then really build out that functionality, or make them go to a competitor because the possibility is there for them? So I like the idea of making the tooling available. We're kind of expanding and looking more at like additional logic. So you can look at a couple of different protocols. There's varying degrees of complexity, right? So there's other attributes you can add to the asset. You can add logic to say, who the asset can be sent to. This is more for like securitization, for real estate,
Hmm.
for equity, for debt. So there's many use cases, but I think at the most basic level, the colored coin is really exciting because you can now reference it in an application, or if you want to have your own token that sits on top of IOTA, I think you can do that today. And when it comes to stable tokens, that probably will require a little more logic, either with like the new DApp framework or possibly even the smart contracts.
Yeah, no, because I know from our own work with Cup Crush, if somebody's buying a coffee in Canadian dollars or US dollars or in euros, and they get their refund back, they want that refund back in their native fiat.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to have to in Canada buy my coffee in US dollars. It would be annoying. I need to use the
Yeah,
currency in which I live and work. And so, to the extent that, IOTA, I don't know if you imagine a world in which IOTA will become a reserve currency or a regularly traded asset in the way that Bitcoin is today, which is still very marginal. Most people, I think, are still going to want to conduct their daily business and get credit in local fiat currency, and they may speculate or invest in things in a larger way in IOTA. Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe do you think I'm right, wrong?
Yeah, so I going into I think this kind of brings in the conversation of mana specifically, right? So talking about
Okay.
like the mana marketplace and how you if you want to have high bandwidth applications, right, with the rate limiting that will go on after a certain
Yes.
TPS, you're going to want to hold IOTA so that you can generate mana. I've been saying for some time, I really like the analogy of like spectrum, right? So when you think about like telecommunications,
Hmm.
spectrum is something that's very functional, right? You have to own it, and then you can exchange data along it. But it also is speculated on, right? So there's a secondary market for it. People will hold it for a long time and then see it'll go up in value. I kind of see something similar with IOTA, and I don't talk about it being speculated, right? This is like a personal opinion. Now as part of the being a member of the IF, but I've always seen that that is kind of what IOTA will turn into, is this, like you said, like this reserve currency, this reserve digital asset. That as the network accrues more value, more use cases, it's going to become more valuable because it's going to become it is a scarce resource. And
Right.
if you want to hold IOTA to have more bandwidth on the network, to have more uh, to, when rate limiting does eventually kick in, I think it's going to become incredibly valuable just there. And that's not even talking about the its utility of being able to send data frictionlessly, feelessly, and all that.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So again, without revealing anything that you're not allowed to reveal, when I made the first 100 billion reasons video, at that time Robert Bosch had just bought a whole sort of stack of IOTA. They'd invested in the token. Um, do you think we're going to see major corporations, as yet unnamed, investing in large amounts of IOTA in the months, let's say the time frame 2020 to the end of 2020 or in 2021? Are we going to start to see some of those investments happening, where people start to invest in it because they're rolling out beta products and so on?
Yeah, and I think that might be already happening. I think it
Okay.
probably is already happening, right? So, when I was at SumSum a year and a half ago, there were corporate partners asking me how to acquire IOTA because they were building industrial use cases for it. So
Right.
I think it already is happening. Now, the great thing about being a permissionless network is that we don't always know, right? You don't have to come to us to acquire IOTA.
Yes.
I will say that, again, getting back to that idea around custody and EDDSA, I already know that there are a couple of big players in North America that are already looking to hold IOTA, but they're waiting for that EDDSA announcement, or not for the announcement, but for the actual custody solutions. So yes, I think that it's something we're going to probably see more over time, and it's also something that that is being hampered by this one technical upgrade that we need to do.
Okay. What about reusable addresses? That's obviously something that's going to be of interest to people, especially if they want to set up addresses that people can send money reliably to,
Mm-hmm.
and not find that the address is no longer usable because it's been spent from. How do you
Yeah,
think that will aid adoption from some of these commercial users?
Yeah, I think that reusable addresses is part of a larger conversation around user experience and usability in general. That's a big focus of ours moving forward with these upgrades. Um, Not only how do we make the protocol easier for the everyday person to use, right? That includes reusable addresses. That includes making the wallet as easy as possible, though it's pretty easy now. But it's also about adoption, right? So right now it can be difficult to query the Tangle, and it can be difficult to embed if you're an exchange or if you're a corporate partner. It might be difficult using the token and having to have this reusable address component, even with Hub, just because it's outside of their normal operating procedure for how
Yep.
they integrate other blockchains. So I think that just kind of falls into this idea that with these upgrades, it's going to be a lot easier to engage with the token, with the protocol, and I think even with like the new DApp framework, this feeless DApp framework that we've integrated into Pollen. I think it's going to be easier to build applications because we have this messaging protocol. We have like the three layer architecture now. that is distinct from the rest. So I do think that that's it. It just kind of falls in line with that line of thinking, and especially with like the experienced team now that we have, with just like making sure we have the proper documentation, making sure that it's easier for developers to build on.
Okay, cool. So Darnell has been very patient and has asked a couple of times. He wants you to talk more about mana as an analogy for RF spectrum. Um, there we are. There's the question.
Scalability will be counter to the interest of large mana holders. Oh, that's an interesting take. I don't know if that's necessarily, if you can say that scalability as a whole will be counter to the interest of large mana holders, right? Because it's an individual node that's running mana. It's not like mana is spread out across an entire network. I actually might be totally putting my foot in my mouth. I don't know the full characteristics of it, and I think we're still defining it. But my understanding would be if one node wants to build more application, it's a personal incentive, right? So if I'm Dell and I'm running the data confidence fabric and I have an Iota node and I have a lot of bandwidth, or I need a lot of bandwidth, I'm going to want to hold Iota and have a node that's generating a lot of mana so that I can run more bandwidth. I don't know how that's counter to them necessarily. Oh, I guess the more scalable you become, the less mana you need. Okay, well, we can bring that offline.
Okay.
How do we prevent contention during improvement? So these are my suggestion, Darnell, is I would reach out to the research team, because I know that it sounds like we've got, in the last research update, we said that there's 2 versions now that we're now creating RFCs for, or we're creating requirements for. So definitely jump into Discord and ask that question.
Cool. Now you mentioned Dell in there, and I can't resist the temptation to ask if there are any updates on the whole trust fabric. I know this is probably a question for Matt Yager, but do you know if there are any updates or any progress that's been made as far as the whole trust fabric initiative with Dell?
Supposedly there's something coming soon. I don't know when soon is, the TM eventual soon, but believe me, I ask every day about that project, because it's, to me, I think it's like one of the most exciting use cases.
Yeah.
So supposedly we've made some really great progress, and I'm sure Matt can speak to it soon.
Yeah. Okay. And Ben, sort of in line with Trust Fabric, and some of the other questions that we've talked about, has asked, ways in which you think that Iota can be used in terms of fleeing data surveillance. He says Professor Zuboff mostly criticizes social media platforms, but what other classes of intrusion do you think Iota can help with as far as data and privacy?
Yeah, I think that if you really digest her book, you realize that it's not a function of social media platforms. It's a function of this new model for capitalism in general that spreads out. Like, it's not just the social media platforms that are harvesting data and monetizing it. So eventually it will be the IoT network, right? It'll be whoever is running all the data within a smart city. It's going to be whoever is connecting your TV to your car to your refrigerator. All that data becomes incredibly valuable. So I don't know what kind of class of intrusion I would call that necessarily, but it becomes a question of control, right? And how we're building incentives into these systems. If you it doesn't matter what their intentions are. If you have a for-profit company that wants to monetize and make as much money as possible,
Yep.
then they're obviously going to engineer a system to make the most money possible. So that incorporates you being an unwilling participant in that model, right? The example I used before was, do I turn left in my autonomous car or my bike? Do I get the option to turn left down the street or right and up? Because if I go right and up, they partner with someone that they're going to make more money because I'm seeing an ad on that street, right? So it really does turn into the control, like our control at its most basic level, right? Like, spend 5 minutes on something or 3 minutes on something. Spend your time going in one direction, eating this, eating that. Like, it all just boils down to this form of capitalism that is for control for the sake of monetization, not even for the control of any ideology.
Yeah. No, and we all become like pigeons performing for the system in order to get rewards rather than necessarily acting in what we think is our own best interest. And
Exactly.
you can see that where people start changing their behavior in order to maximize their likes,
Mm-hmm.
which, is a form of manna, I guess, in a way. It's, it's bizarre how people will actually run their lives and do things. There's a great article that somebody on Twitter put me onto. It's called "Watching You"
Mm.
on BBC. I don't know if you've listened to it, and it talks about the day the world changed when the first episode of Big Brother aired on TV, and suddenly anybody could become a media star just by
Yep.
being themselves.
Yep.
And that now the lines have blurred between who you really are and who you need to be in order to get the sort of the response on TV, on the internet, and that ultimately it only matters who you are in social media, or who you are for the public, not who you really are anymore, and that
Yep.
it's really quite scary. So, um,
It's super scary, and I think when you even overlay that onto like predictive analytics
yep,
and like quantum computing, it's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that there have been like 3 or 4 uh, uh, TV shows in the past year, in the past 3 months, running at the same time that are focusing on this. So one is called Devs. I don't know if anyone saw that on Hulu, or if anyone saw the 3rd season of Westworld. And now I guess the Foundation series, which if you know anything about the Foundation, right, it's about predicting kind of the future. But I won't give anything away, but it's all kind of around this idea of like when you have these super fast, super smart computers that can actually predict human behavior, like how does that affect incentives?
yeah.
So I think it is all kind of a new frontier that we're taking very lightly.
So how does Iota solve for some of that, or mitigate some of the risks of that, in
Yeah,
your
well,
opinion?
this has always been, I think, one of our biggest value propositions outside of being a feeless protocol is that we really are trying to become this open source nonprofit standard, right? We really do want to become this data layer that's nonpartisan, non-partial, and can be used by anyone without any sort of incentives like built in that could affect um, how it's used necessarily, if that makes sense. So where I want to go with this. So like, we have a lot of competitors now that will sport, hey, we're fast or we're, scalable, but they might be a for-profit, right? So like, what's the incentive for them to run the network? And I think then you're competing more with products rather than like an infrastructure layer. So
Hmm.
I think that's always kind of been our value prop, and I think that's why like governments and large companies find us so appealing and intriguing because
Right.
we have that attribute.
Yeah. And Michael has asked a question. I guess, sort of this whole area of privacy sort of leads into identity. So Michael has asked, is there any adoption progress with identity on IOTA in North America? And obviously we saw the Selv um, uh, POC. Any sort of interest or uptake? I don't know to what extent that would tie in with the Dell trust fabric. But it would be interesting to know if there's any action there. And can you prove that you actually are the real Dan Simerman?
No, I don't think so. Unfortunately, not. Uh, Nothing I think can verify that. So to answer the identity thing, I know that Yele is working on it. Probably something to ask him. I'm not too close on the day to day. I just know that every time I talk to someone or a potential corporate partner or or an interested party, identity is something that they're very interested in. It's a big value prop.
Yeah.
So I think embedding it in the protocol will be pretty useful.
Yeah, this is a controversial question, but I was talking to my banker the just yesterday actually, because I need to rearrange a mortgage, and he was telling me that the bank has adopted new technology in the last 3 months that was, you know, the roadmap was over 5 to 7 years for them to do many of the things that they've now been forced to do in a space of 3 months because of coronavirus. So, to what extent has the coronavirus pandemic aided the advancement of Iota and distributed ledger technologies in the mindset of organizations that you've been talking to, where they realize that perhaps it is more important to start looking at these technology solutions that people had as something that was far, far out in the future, and now that's all being accelerated because of the way the world has changed?
Yeah, I mean, you could probably apply like some of the concepts around like anti-fragile, right? Around like resiliency. Um, I think where we've the DLT blockchain space and digital assets in general have kind of always been in a bubble, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
said, there's an alternative model for engaging in economic activity or engaging in value transfer. So I don't think that it's been. I mean, it's been slowly taken more seriously over time. I think that actually having a crisis like this while the technology is available, rather than in 2008 as Bitcoin was kind of being born around that time. Um, I think that now there's kind of a solution that people can look to and go, oh, so here's how you can, potentially use digital assets to send payments faster, right? Like there's even a mention of, or almost a mention of digital assets in one of the relief bills in America, right? So it's starting to kind of enter the public lexicon, I think to a certain degree. I still think that most blockchains don't offer most use cases that are necessary. So I don't think that something wasn't working and then a company said, oh, now I want blockchain, because they've already looked at blockchain. They know that it doesn't really work
Right.
the way that it needs to. So I think that where our strength is now, although I don't think coronavirus necessarily affected it too much, is really just focusing on what makes Iota so unique. Focusing on the data, focusing on security, actually providing a security layer for IoT devices, talking about interoperability between these devices, creating this connective tissue between the human economy and the machine economy with that kind of value transfer layer. So I think if anything, this is it's definitely propelling digital assets as a whole. Maybe the DLT side, not so much. I don't know if it's changed anymore. I definitely think people are looking at digital assets a little more seriously.
Cool. Cool. We have a big brain in the audience who's asked if you know Swissborg. This sounds like a custody question, but apparently it's a platform where you can buy Bitcoin and other assets at the lowest price, gaining a lot of attraction right now. It would be nice to see IOTA take a place in Swissborg. Have you heard of that?
It sounds familiar. Um, I'm not too familiar. I'm looking at the questions now. I'm
Yeah.
not too familiar with it, but I've heard the name.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like a character from a bad sci-fi movie, the Swissborg, but
Yeah, look, as long as I mean, this is my biggest complaint always with this space is like pay to play, and this is kind of another like large trend is that IOTA doesn't generally pay vendors to build on us. So like
yes.
oftentimes like I'm not calling out Swissborg, but like oftentimes a Swissborg or like another partner will go, hey, we're very interested, or hey, there's a really long queue. If you pay us $500,000, we will put you in front of the line. So often these integrations are very much paid into, and it can be a very frustrating conversation. So hey,
Yeah.
if they're not in that bucket, happy to talk with them.
Okay, excellent. So, Big Brain, if you're familiar with them, maybe you can broker something, but certainly not on a pay-for-play basis. So,
Um,
um,
there's also a question here. What is your opinion on privacy in cryptocurrency? Would it fit for IOTA to allow fully private transactions between users? So I can tell you actually in early conversations with a group, looking at some interesting. They're not part of the foundation, but just kind of like looking at privacy a little deeper. I know privacy is a contentious subject, right? And there's a difference between privacy and anonymity, certainly, but we want to be as compliant as possible while also making sure that we've got privacy safeguards. And sometimes there's a little bit of a tension there, especially with some of the parties that we're talking to in North America. But we definitely want to make sure that we are being private, or making sure that there's security, and then kind of building out from there.
Cool. Cool. Anything else that you want to share with the group? We're coming closer to the top of the hour. Things that you want to talk about. If there are other questions, I don't know if you want to take the question from Michael down here. Apart from just your sheer passion, what's your incentive for you to remain an IF member? Where's your upside if there are no share options as a non-profit? I think that's probably fairly obvious, but yeah.
Yeah, if it's obvious, it's obvious. I mean, the Iota Foundation does have a treasury, and it does pay its employees. But I mean, I didn't join the IF necessarily just for the payment. Obviously, I think we all joined because we're like incredibly passionate. I mean,
yeah.
I reached out to Dom and David, and basically, we came together and saw an opportunity to expand into North America, and it was really just born out of this like desire and passion to do it. So
and you were running a meetup group in New York City before any of that happened. So I mean,
that's right.
You were a true believer in the early days anyway. So it's not like you got hired purely as a job, 9 to 5.
No, and to deal with all like the crap of talking with other crypto people, businesses, like that you can't. They're like it would cost too much to like it's all the crap you have to deal with. Anyway, so no, it's very much a labor of love, and I mean that honestly. Like I wake up every day excited and passionate and looking for ways to build us out. And even though I've also learned that the time scale of things here, because you're also overlapped with like a soon to be regulated market, or at least a market that regulators are looking at. I know from the outside looking in sometimes, and even I think like, wow, like 4 months, like what's to show for it. And then like, the Crypto Ratings Council reviewer come out, which, could take months and months and months. And even though it doesn't seem so significant, these things, they can take quite a while. So I've really learned to be patient, given all of the work that happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, I think you have to take a long-term view. I mean, like you, I got involved with Iota and started doing all of this purely out of interest and passion. The rewards will come later, but my interest and belief in the platform has not wavered. Although, like you, there are times when things take way too long, compared to what you would wish for. And there are times when you get disheartened, and then something happens and you go, wow, this is going to happen. And I would say I'm probably more of a believer today than I was when I first got involved and turned on to Iota. So
absolutely, and I think that it's a roller coaster. Like there are days where I wake up and I'm like, oh God, like we got such a road to climb, and then there'll be days where it's like everything's running smoothly. So I think in the crypto space, I would just end by saying, I'm very happy with the progress that I've made, kind of personally, but also as a group, and the work that I've been doing with Dom and David. Like we've really unshaken some big barriers in the past 6 months that were kind of invisible to the naked eye. And I can say quite confidently, I think that we're gonna see a lot of growth due to that shakeup. And I know we don't like to say soon, and I know like I try not to be a very I don't try to hype too much, but I think that's kind of what's the fuel that's keeping me going right now, is kind of the excitement that I have for the next couple months.
Yeah, well, even beyond the next couple of months, I think the next year is going to be an incredibly exciting time for Iota. And it seems that, in almost every area that you look, from research and development, from the protocol, from the use cases, that the potential is so massive, and there really isn't anything else out there that comes close to competing with Iota. So I'm excited. I still remain incredibly passionate and optimistic. Obviously, you do too. It's been a pleasure to chat. So greetings to everybody out there who are watching, and we look forward to meeting with you again soon, and hearing about some of the stuff that is no longer under NDA, and you can share with us, and we can hear what's actually becoming real and
Certainly.
tangible. So, all right. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to the next IEN talk coming up soon. Thank you.